So.
Good morning and welcome to the Celtic Way Morning Briefing Live. I'm Tony Haggerty and I'm delighted to be joined once again by Alison McConnell and Sean Martin. Good morning, guys. How are we doing?
Good morning.
Good, Tony. Yourself?
Good. It's the morning after the afternoon before, and Celtic shipped another 2 points at Celtic Park with a 1-1 draw against Dundee United. Now, I'll come to you first, Alison, and you can give me your thoughts on the score and the start to the season, and do you notice a wee change in the mood music around Celtic at this minute in time?
Without question, I think 10 points from 21 games. I think 1 win out of the last 4 league games. I think it's evaporated the early feel-good factor that was there. I think it's been a tough month. I think it's an even tougher month now that lies ahead when you look at trips to Fir Park looming and going to Easter Road at the end of October. I think in between the Europa League campaign. I think it's the lack of the resources in terms of squad depth we've spoken about till exhaustion. But I think really what you would have to say is performance levels just haven't been good enough. I think when you analyse the game yesterday, you could conclude that Celtic really ought to have come away with something. I think if you hit the crossbar and hit the woodwork 3 times in the game, I think you can consider yourself a bit unfortunate not to take something. But I think there's a frailty about Celtic that you just can't ignore just now.
I agree with that totally. Sean, you wrote yesterday that it's scant consolation. Coulda, woulda, shoulda was the kind of thrust of your colour piece that about possibly winning that game. You know, you did your man-by-man ratings as well, and you know you sort of came away with the thought that it's results now, isn't it, that are crucial and important, and you can't keep saying we played well against Hearts. That was akin to the Hearts game, but still didn't win.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the results have always mattered. Let's not beat about the bush. They did always matter, but I've always tried to look at it from Ange's point of view, almost, where he's trying a certain level of performance and a certain consistency of performance that he has to try and ingrain in them. And he basically wants to see that whether they win, lose or draw. Last week against Livy, because he didn't see it at all, it was I don't think the Dundee United game yesterday was anywhere near that. I think it is, as you say there, it is another one where, and as I've said in my analysis of the game, it's another one where you say, should they hit the bar 3 times, all of that, created enough to win it. They don't, or at least more. Year to there, all the caveats are still in effect. Celtic are working progress. They're still missing 4 or 5 men, and obviously stuff off the field with Dominic Mackay and all that entails. You're, as I'll say, 7 in the league, and it's filing it under should have won that game like against Hearts. Didn't deserve to win. I thought that's where the scant consolation part comes in, because it's still a start to a season, and whether they've won the game or not, again, we're seeing they've won the game, where the scant consolation part comes into it for me.
Sean, is your Wi-Fi playing up? Because there was a bit of Norman Collier speak about that. For those of a certain vintage that can remember comedian Norman Collier, you were drifting in and out, so just watch that moving forward. Alison, yeah, Sean touches on a very good point there about should have won that game but didn't, you know, and yeah, they were unlucky. They did hit the bar on 3 separate occasions, as you've mentioned, but also a big factor there was Ajeti missed a real sitter at one point, didn't he? Just after Dundee United had scored, and for the life of every Celtic supporter, they don't know what happened there.
You missed a few, actually. I'm assuming you're referring to the one where he just lifted it over the bar when he was inside the 6-yard box. All he had to do was steer it into the corner. I think it sums up Celtic's season so far. I think the early optimism has diminished completely. I think they look bereft without the input of Kyogo, Furuhashi and Callum McGregor. I think they're key players to have lost, and I think when you already have big players out like James Forrest and Christopher Julian, I think it was always going to be a difficulty in replacing them. But I think Celtic should have been able to cope with it way more than they have. I think one of the real obvious and glaring factors for me is a lack of leadership on the pitch. I don't know if you see it at all in games. I think it just seems to drift. There's no one that seems capable of trying to offer a bit of leadership within the game. I think you see it sometimes from Joe Hart, but I think you need it infield too. I think you need it to come from the players or outfield. I don't know if some of that comes down to the fact that there's so many players who have just come into the club and you're trying to gel different people and introduce new players, but certainly Celtic look rudderless at the minute.
Sean, Alison raised a good point about the leadership factor. Now, I watched Fuchs put in a challenge on McCarthy, arguably a red card. I thought it was a red card, but I don't actually see Celtic players willing to go in like that. And I don't mean hurt or injure opponents. I'm talking about just put their foot in where it hurts at times, and really have a bit of dig. There seems to be a lack of cohesion about the Celtic midfield at this moment as well, and other departments in the team. But is nobody's kind of, with the exception of Jota yesterday, I thought nobody really stepped up to the plate and took any kind of responsibility.
No, I agree. I think Jota was by far Celtic's best player. I think Abada played well as well, but beyond that, I think it was pretty pedestrian from a lot of them. I think you mentioned a bit of dig there. I think in his performances so far, I think that's pretty much all James McCarthy brings as it stands. I think he does try and he launched his selling a few tackles against Livingston. He done the same yesterday, and he was bearing the brunt of the kind of Dundee United physicality. But beyond that, I think is where McCarthy kind of looks like a fish out of water, if you want to put it that way. I think the single pivot role that McGregor plays, I don't think he can play it in the same way, and I think you can see that anytime Celtic are obviously a ball dominant team. I think there's a difference between playing in that area of the park for a ball dominant team as opposed to a team that spends a lot of time without the ball, which is what he's been used to for most of his career. He might be able to adapt to that, but I think possibly if there's a role for him in the team going forward, it's not going to be in that role.
Yeah, I mean, David Bradley comes in here to say, so we've been well ripped off by Motherwell. Turnbull is not control of one single game. He's getting to me. Is that harsh, Alison, or is that fair?
It's incredibly harsh, I think. I can appreciate what you're saying, that you want more. I think you have to remember this time 12 months ago, David Turnbull wasn't even a Celtic first team player. I think he's still a young player. I think you've seen some inconsistencies in performance, but I think there are other players that should be shouldering a bit more responsibility at this time.
Do you agree with that, Sean? Do you think that's harsh as well on David Turnbull?
I think it's slightly harsh. I think people are entitled to want more consistency from him, if you want to put it that way, because he has been kind of peaks and troughs so far this season. But I think I'd agree with Alison. I think there's other members of the team that you should be looking at for that kind of criticism before you look at Turnbull. I think sometimes the stats can be skewed by the fact that he takes the set pieces, but he does still create. Despite what it might appear like, maybe because of his style, it's maybe just perception, but it does, like when it comes to the actual raw statistics, he does try and put in the effort off the ball more than what I think people were expecting from him at the start of the season. And since Ryan Christie's left, he's been regularly the kind of most active, if you want to put it that way, midfielder in terms of pressing to try and get the ball back and stuff. Not that it is to Ryan Christie's level, but he still is attempting it, which I think he deserves credit for. But I think it's as much perception as anything else. I mentioned it last week. When you're flogging Turnbull and Rogic every single game, having to start the both of them every game, neither of them can really afford to have a poor game. So when they do go through a poor spell, it looks even worse because there's nobody to come on and take that creative responsibility off them.
Yeah. Now, something else you wanted to touch upon, Sean, we spoke about it off air, was the referee, but you wanted to make the point that he was poor for both sides. Mm-hmm. Now, I mentioned the Fuchs challenge, which could have been a red card on McCarthy. There was a definite penalty denied by Dundee United, Cameron Carter-Vickers, blatant shove in the box, and you were saying you wanted to highlight a couple of other instances.
I think if the obvious one to me was the Benjamin Siegrist. I think that looked deliberate to me.
Yeah.
I think it was Abada was not really any threat to him whatsoever. He's come at rampaging at his box and I think clearly kicked him in the groin. So the referee missed that one. I thought it looked as if he was in a good position to see it. He missed that. It just generally, I think the officials just generally had a poor game. And as you said, I don't want to make that sound as if it's an excuse for why Celtic didn't win the game, because I think Tam Courts and Dundee United were right to criticise him after the game as well. I think they did get denied a penalty. You could argue there was maybe a foul on Starfelt in the build-up. Might have been a bit harsh to give that, because I think a lot of it owed to Starfelt's poor control. But there was other kind of maybe not as impactful decisions. But I thought the officials were pretty poor yesterday in general.
That your same take as you, Alison? Do you think the officials had a poor game yesterday?
I would agree with all the points. I thought it was a penalty. I thought it would have been soft. I know a few people had referenced the foul on Starfelt. I thought it would have been soft to give it. I thought, and the one with Abada, I thought was definitely a foul. I thought it was a bit naughty. But I thought he was poor. I did think he was poor.
Now, a lot of the Celtic fans' anger or criticism towards the manager has been the fact that he did very little to change things in the Betis game, the Livingston game, and even yesterday. Now, Sean, you were a proponent of putting Abada through the middle at some point if things aren't working. I mean, with Ajeti yesterday, it wasn't working, and the kind of Celtic fans said that he went into hiding after he missed that sitter. There's some stat that you're going to give us about the amount of crosses that Celtic put into the box, and Ajeti just wasn't anywhere near them. So if you're a manager and you're looking on at that, there are 3 players who could have instantly got hooked or substituted yesterday, and amazingly, all 3 finished the game.
I think on the Ajeti one, the start of the crosses, by the way, I had a wee look at the data, and it was 32 crosses, which was more than even against Livingston there, which we all saw that the performance against Livingston was insipid and relentlessly boring, really, to be honest. To put in more crosses is probably maybe a bit of a shock, considering it was Parkhead and stuff, but what I would have said was, all right, the goal came from a high cross, but a lot of the crosses I think they were fizzed across, which is actually better for the way Celtic play. It should be better. So I think to bring that back to what you said about Ajeti was, like, everybody misses a sitter, especially a centre forward. They get in, all right, it was still a bad one to miss, but it still was there to miss it. But the key for me was that he didn't seem to be there again to miss another one, if you know what I mean. I think the criticism that you mentioned of him kind of going hiding, maybe it was posted missing, is what I said in my match ratings. Whether it was because it was lack of service, I don't know. I don't think so, because 32 crosses speaks for itself. There was a couple of really good low crosses that you would think maybe somebody like Kyogo would have really ate up. So it was, for me, it wasn't the fact that he was maybe not as involved out with the box. It was the fact that when the ball came in the box, he still wasn't involved after missing that sitter, and I think that potentially got to him, and that's where the worry would be for me.
Do you agree with that, Alison, that kind of lack of movement from Ajeti yesterday, and just kind of after he missed that sitter, he maybe did let it get to him, and it played on his mind a bit?
I think movement's a big one for me. I think at times, if you're going to play that role, you have to be quite clever. You have to be thinking ahead. You have to be gambling sometimes. I think you have to be trying to predict where you want to be. I think it looks at times, whether it's a fair observation or not, it's another matter, but I think there's a meandering element to the performance at times. I think you want him to be bursting a gut to get in front of a defender or get onto the end of something, and I just don't know if you get the sense of urgency that you maybe need and want to see.
Yeah, I mean, Celtic supporters were saying they could have, as Sean said as well, and we've said a couple of times, maybe taken off Ajeti, put Abada through the middle and brought Moffat on. That seemed to be the kind of change that a lot of Celtic supporters would have liked to have seen yesterday. But again, it didn't happen, and Celtic needed a goal to win the game, and it didn't come. And that's what now It's a less than 50% win rate, Sean, in the league, and 6 points behind Rangers. And I know it's only 7 games into the season, but there are causes for concern. Are there not?
Yes, of course there is if you're not winning. But I think, to go back to what you said there about the substitutions, I mean, I kind of hypothetically suggested that if they wanted someone to try and replicate what Kyogo brings, while he was out, then Abada they could maybe do worse than shoving Abada through the middle to see how it goes. I think it's quite obvious he's not going to do it, because he would have tried it at this point with Giakoumakis out and no alternative to Ajeti. But what I like about Abada is, and you've seen it in the last couple of games, he seems to have, as much as he's a winger and he's there to provide, he seems to have that eagerness to also get on the score sheet. You saw it even at the beginning of the season when he wanted to take a penalty off of Edward and stuff. Like, he does want to get on the score sheet. So there's the worst ideas if it's not working for the only striker that you've got in the squad to maybe change that up, because it means you don't need to change the kind of overall game plan that he obviously wasn't going to change anyway. It might have been unfair to shove Moffat on and expect him to rescue the game, but by the same token, it's almost a free hit as well. Why not? So, I think there's logic in that suggestion.
I look at Abada, Alison, and I saw a centre forwards goal yesterday from a winger getting in front of his man and burying that header. And it's not for the first time that Abada has shown instinct in the box like that. He scored 2 or 3 goals this season like that. So it's not a position that if you put him into it, that it would be alien to him.
I would agree with you. I think the three of us have seen that. We've spoken about it before and would agree on it. But obviously, I think the manager's just not going to adopt that viewpoint. I think if he was going to go that way, you would have seen it by now, or you would even see it within a game of making that change. And there's just been no indication at all. But I would agree with you. I think he's had a fairly impressive start to Celtic.
Nope.
Wi-Fi issues all round today.
And you feel the sense of responsibility that they feel when the team's not performing. I think that's why, it's one of many reasons why you really need Celtic to start to stitch together a running win of games. Whether or not you're going to see that consistency, I don't know that there's the evidence to suggest it will come unless you have key players coming back soon.
I was just going to say that, Sean, that at this moment in time with the personnel that Celtic have, they don't look capable of stringing a win and run together, do
they? Again, I think the Livy game stands out to me. Just that was by far the worst performance. I don't think it was anywhere near as bad as that yesterday, and they did still create enough to win it. So in that respect, it's another one, as I said earlier on, that they should have won. It's either rub of the green, depends on your inclination. It's either rub of the green, or it's perhaps lacking the intensity to make sure that they don't hit the bar once out of the 3 times kind of thing, and put one of the other chances away. Either way, Alison's not wrong. It does need to be a win and run, and we've been saying this now for 4 weeks. That I think every predicted lineup for the last 4 or 5 games has been, this is now a must-win game. And that's not going to change. That's going to keep going and going and going. You can literally say it every week from now on.
Now, I know they play Leverkusen in the Europa League on Thursday, Alison, but you touched upon it at the top of the broadcast, and it's a huge month domestically for Celtic. Trips to Pittodrie, Fir Park and Easter Road. You can't say with any level of confidence that Celtic are going to go to any of those 3 places and win at this moment in time.
Well, certainly when you look at the form of the away form, it wouldn't augur any kind of confidence. I think it becomes now sacrificing principles almost in a way, because performances and level of performances aren't going to matter. I think what you need now is you find a way to win, regardless of how that comes. I think Aberdeen, it might be the only other team that are rivaling Celtic for such an inauspicious start to the season. I think you've got to go and try and manipulate the vulnerability that they've shown in recent weeks. I think it becomes about focusing on the next game and making sure that you come away with the points, that there's nothing else. It's win or bust. And I know it's September and it's only 6 points, but the last thing Celtic need now is to go into free fall, because last season I think they took 25 points out of 27 up until mid-October, and then when it fell apart, it really started to fall apart. I think you just can't afford to have that same environment and that same prevailing feeling of going into free fall and not having a grip of performances and results.
Do you agree with that, Sean? Do you concur with that?
Yes, I don't think anybody can disagree with that. I think it's. I think you pointed out that where Celtic have got to go domestically, especially since the away record is so poor. But as Alison pointed out, if there's anywhere you probably would choose just now, it probably would be Pittodrie, because Aberdeen, that's 8 games I think they've not won for now. And Celtic's record at Pittodrie is pretty good. We went over it last week, Tony. Unbeaten in general against Aberdeen since May 2018, but I think it was February 2016 the last time Aberdeen actually beat Celtic at Pittodrie. I think the last 2 games were draws, but still, I think if you could pick somewhere else that's maybe going through the same type of trough that Celtic is just now, I think it would be Aberdeen. I think they've also got their system worries to seek. With Stephen Glass trying to bring a new philosophy into a team that, quite frankly, doesn't look equipped to play it. So that could all work to Celtic's favour if there's even a couple of the players back that we've referenced already.
Well, it'll all come out in the wash. Crucial month coming up for Celtic, both domestically and in Europe. I've been Tony Haggerty, and I've been joined by Sean Martin and Alison McConnell. Thanks for your contribution, guys. If you see at the bottom, you can subscribe to the Celtic Way for $2.99 for top quality journalism in the club you love. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit the subscribe button. Thanks a lot for watching.
Cheers, Tony.
Thank you.